So what we're going to build using some basic HTML and JavaScript is a mini chatbot like app using a free API for a large language model. I'm using Gemini from Google because it's free. And this is really cool because you can experiment with a large language model like ChatGPT. This is Google's version of ChatGPT essentially. Because if you're just learning to code or you're really early on and you're wondering, what do I do with AI? So many people want to learn AI and they think machine learning, data science. I'm here to tell you, I'm a software engineer, been doing this for about 10 years. I recently started incorporating a lot of AI, not only into my personal projects, but I've had to learn it for work. And the way that I'm learning it and the way that I'm using it practically is not by studying data science and machine learning. If that's your thing, then yeah, go ahead and do it. But the way you can use it practically is what I'm going to show you here. We're going to get an API key. We're going to call the Gemini API endpoint. We're going to feed it in some text that a user can type in. Then we're going to get a response back. This is a really good base for you to start learning how to work with these APIs. API, by the way, stands for Application Programming Interface. Not super important to know. Basically, it's like, how do you programmatically interact with a tool like ChatGPT without being on the actual ChatGPT website? I'll show you in just a second. This is something you can start doing right now. You don't have to have any fancy tools. I'm using CodePen because CodePen allows me to quickly scaffold an app. So that's enough talking. Let's get right down to business. Now, before we can write any code, I had to go to aistudio.google.com and get myself an API key. I already created an API key. I'm not going to show you mine here, but you'll see it on the screen. And by the time you see this, I'll already have revoked it. This is very important. Don't share your API key with anybody. Don't put it on a public site like this because somebody could just find it, take it, and if this was a paid service, which most APIs are, you would get charged and you would cry and go home and be like, "Oh my God, my life is ruined. I owe $10,000 to Google," or something like that. Your life is over its toast. So please don't expose your API keys. Do this experiment, make this little project on your own, and then maybe erase it or just delete the API key. And when you want to play with it again, you add the API key back in. Now, there are ways to get around this when you're writing actual production grade software that don't include erasing keys and things like that, but that's outside the scope of this very short video. So first thing we're going to do is make a little input because why not, right? Like we want somebody to be able to type in something, ask a question, and then get that information back from Google Gemini. We're going to say, ask whatever, like, hey, tell me a recipe for making hot dogs. I don't know. So I'm making this input. We're going to give it a type of equal to text and we're going to close it off. If you don't know how to do this kind of stuff, you should really go to codecademy.com and learn basic HTML and CSS because what the hell are you even doing just watching somebody type code? What the heck's the point of that? Next, let's have a button because we always want a button so people can actually click on something and, click or I don't know, submit maybe. Yeah, sure. Why not? Some people are probably already yelling, this should be a form. I don't care. I don't want it to be a form. So it's not a form. Okay, cool. We have something that looks okay. I mean, it looks all right. Whatever. Doesn't really matter. Here's the fun part. So a user clicks on something and then something happens. Let's give a little bit of space around this thing. Let's put a div around here and a div around here. And you might be thinking, why does his look so cool and mine looks so janky and lame? And that, my friend, is because I'm using some Tailwind. And if you want to have it look cool like mine, just go to CSS. I'm in the settings, go to CSS, and I added, what did I add? Tailwind. I added Daisy UI Tailwind CSS components. Not even really sure how that works. If it works like Tailwind, then this should probably work. I'll give it a P-4 and see if that does anything. Doesn't look like it. Okay, whatever. Yeah, not really tripping. I'm gonna format this now too, just so I can make it look decent. Format the HTML. Cool. Let's give this button an ID of BTN, and let's give this input an ID of user dash input. And you might be wondering, why am I giving these IDs? Because I want to use JavaScript to target these elements to do something. So just think in plain English, what are we trying to do? When a user types something and they click the submit button, we want to send whatever they typed in that box to the Google Gemini API, get a response back, and show that on the screen, which leads me to we want to show it on the screen somewhere, right? So let's have another div here, like a placeholder essentially for where we're going to stuff our answer. And we'll give this a class, or we'll give this an ID of result. Why not? Now let's make some JavaScript variables. We'll do a const user input equals document dot get element by ID user dash input. Now, the reason I'm using plain JavaScript and plain HTML instead of doing like Next.js or React is because this is geared more towards early career developers and people that might not be used to working with React or Next. And that's one of the big problems I see is that too many of the tutorials that are out there, they assume that you're already way far along and you already know React or Next or whatever. And there's no reason to wait that long to begin using AI. I really think that this is table stakes now for becoming a software engineer. There's a really big divide going on right now. On one end, we have employers that are looking for people with generative AI skills. On one end, we have software developers which are still learning skills which were relevant 5 years ago. In this time period, we've had a massive change, obviously, with AI, but we don't have enough developers that even know how to use it beyond a really basic level. I mean, like, they're just using it to create code with Chat GPT. That's not interesting. It's not as useful. And there's not a lot of money and demand for engineers who can just ask Chat GPT to do stuff. There is a big demand for developers that know how to use AI beyond the basics and do a little bit of what I'm going to show you here. And I'm going to tell you how you can take this a few steps further and what I would be learning specifically if I was you. So let's make our button document get element by ID. Basically, I'm just doing some junk to get all my little ducks in a row here. And then finally, let's make our answer section. Let's just call it result to keep it all the same equals. And I'll do the same thing here. And by the way, I'll leave this code in the comments so you can get this code as well if you want to just rip it off and you can begin messing around with it yourself. Result. Cool. So now let's write out in plain English what we want to do. When a user clicks the button, we send our request to the Gemini API. Ooh. Okay, cool. So we do button.add event listener click. And then we have a function that will be called, and that function is going to get the input stuff. So const value or val equals user input dot value. And now we want to send that value to the API. Now, this is when things get fairly interesting. If you're not using APIs yet with JavaScript and HTML and CSS, highly suggest you do. They turn a really basic lame app into something really, really interesting because now you can use data that you don't actually own. An API basically is kind of like a URL, but instead of a URL pointing to a website, it points to a server that's going to give you some data back. That's kind of my mental model, and that may help you out to understand what's going on. Like, you make a request to a server and it will return you a web page most of the time, right? Like you go to google.com or CodePen and it returns you a website. Now you go to an API, you're still using a URL, this universal resource locator, and you're saying, hey, I'm going out there. And it's like, oh, but I'm not a website. Here's some data back. And then you take the data and then you do stuff with the data. So let's go back to the documentation here and we're going to see how we use this. So here is the URL. And sometimes you look at documentation and it's not like immediately clear, like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm going to break it down for you a little bit so you understand how to read documentation like this and then also use it. So this first part is the URL we're going to use. This is a post request. And here's the stuff that you want to send in the request. And we're going to send it in a very particular way. I know this from doing this thousands of times at this point. So I just kind of know how to use this stuff, but you may not know immediately just looking at this what you should do. So let's go in and use this URL and this Gemini API key. You should replace this with your actual API key, the one that you created. So I'm going to use my actual API key and you're going to see what this looks like. So we're going to use the window.fetch method. Fetch is this native, meaning it just comes for free when you use JavaScript and you're in the browser. You have this fetch method, which is used to make a request to a URL. And in here, we're going to put that URL in here, and we're going to erase the Gemini key, and we're going to replace it with our actual key. So I've replaced it with my actual key, and then I'm going to write .then. Why .then? Because this is what's called an asynchronous request, meaning it doesn't just wait for itself to be finished before it moves on to the next line of code. So in order for me to force it to wait, I'm going to say, wait a second, you do that thing, then you give me some stuff. This is boilerplate code, meaning this is just stuff that you unfortunately will need to memorize if you want to be a developer and don't want to bumble around during your interviews. Because good luck trying to tell your interviewer you don't know how to do this during an interview. They may say, "Well, interview's over, my friend." You might say, "Well, what about it? What about AI? Can't I just use AI in my interview?" No, no, you cannot. So stop asking for that stuff. No one's doing that yet, even though it makes no sense. So please don't ask to do that during your interview because you will get laughed out of the room, or at least you just won't pass the interview. Okay, and then I'm gonna call a final dot then for the actual data that I wanna get. Jeez, what a really roundabout way of getting data, isn't it? And I'm gonna console.log the data. Now this won't work on the surface yet, so I'm gonna format this so it looks decent. So this fetch request actually requires us to put a few more pieces of information in it. We're going to need to tell it what type this is. I believe this will be a post request, and we have a body, and the body will be JSON dot stringify. And by the way, I've remembered this kind of stuff. This is something I wouldn't expect you to have memorized at all. This is the kind of thing you absolutely would want to look up, especially if you're really early on in your career. So I get if you don't just memorize this stuff yet, but using a fetch is super common when you're a JavaScript developer. So it is something you should try to commit to memory. And we're just going to copy this. We're going to copy this just like that. Okay, we're going to copy, what are we going to copy actually here? Contents. Yeah, we're gonna copy the contents piece of this, and we're gonna put it back in here, and we're gonna do some formatting. We're gonna take away that part. Okay, and we have parts. Okay, okay. But the text is explain how AI works. We don't want it to explain how AI works. What do we want to send? We want to send the value that the user typed in. So we look at the user input dot value, basically what's in this text box right here. So like A, B, C, D, F, like, or, tell me about hot dogs. Why? I have no clue why you'd want to know about hot dogs. But hey, you do. So if you want to know about hot doges, then you would ask it about hot doges. And so what we want to do is send the val that's here. Let's format this. If this works on the first try, I'm always skeptical if it works on the first try, but who knows? What the hell? Who the hell knows what could happen? Let's look in the console when we run this and let's see what happens. I'm going to clear the console and then I'm going to, let's see here. We have event listener. We listen for a click event. When the click event happens, we get the value from the input. We call the fetch request. We send it in a post and then we get the data and we console log the data right here. Let's see if this thing works and tell me about hot dogs. Now, because this is a free API, we will get rate limited, meaning you can't just send a ton of requests. So be careful because if you mess up too early on and you send a bunch of requests, then you might get rate limited and not be able to make a request for an hour or 5 minutes or whatever. So we submit this and let's see what goes on in the console. Okay, nothing. So this is one of my beefs with CodePen. Doesn't give me any indication what's wrong. So I'm going to look in my browser tools to see what's wrong. I bet I probably have something wrong here. Okay, it says failed to execute fetch. Request with the get head method cannot have a body. Oops, looks like I made a whoopsie here. I probably put in the wrong information for a fetch request. So let's just look it up. Fetch request with post. And let's see how we do this. This is a post. Using fetch, I'm going to go to the old school docs. You could certainly do this with ChatGPT or something. Let's go old school and actually look up some documentation. Ah, method, not type. Ah, what a dummy. What a dummy. What an absolute buffoon I am. Okay, so now that we got that down, let's see if this works again. And let's put hot doge and submit. Look at that. We got a response. Let's see what's in the response. Okay. Text. Ah, hot dogs. They're classic. This is great. Okay, so we are ready to begin using this. And you see this is a large object that's come back, and, obviously, we don't wanna use all of it. We wanna just get the really important pieces of it. So, we're going to explore this object, right? We're gonna get, okay, const, response equals, oh, don't mess up on me now. Okay, const response equals, and let's see like where the actual stuff is at. Like, where's the cool stuff? Okay, response equals data dot candidates, and candidates is an array, so we'll do it array position 0 dot content. Okay, dot content dot parts. Dot parts, and parts is an array. So we'll do at index 0 and parts index 0 dot text, it looks like. Is that correct? Parts 0 dot text. Oof, not a fun thing to dig through, but that's hey, that's just what it is. You know what I mean? And if you have trouble understanding this kind of stuff, again, this signals to me that you probably want to go back and learn a little bit more about objects, functions, and declaring variables. Some of the basics that you can get on Codecademy. But with these very fundamental basics, you can build something that's actually semi interesting here. So now what we need to do is add this result to our results div. So add this to our results div. And what we'll do here is, what do we call this thing? We call this result. Okay, so do result dot append child, or how about this result dot inner HTML plus equals, and in backticks, we'll make some room here. I'm using backticks because this is like a special little character in JavaScript that allows you to write JavaScript code along with like a regular string. Like you can mix words and JavaScript variables in the same line. So I'm going to take this and make a paragraph tag, and we're going to put $sign response. Okay. If you don't know what's happening here with these backticks and this $sign, look that up. This is called string interpolation. Basically a fancy way, like I said, of writing some HTML mixed with some JavaScript code. Basically what I'm doing is saying, hey, go to the result div, and I want you to modify the HTML, and you're going to read this because it's HTML. You're going to add a paragraph tag, and then you're going to add my response in this $sign bracket response means that this is a JavaScript variable, and you're going to interpret that JavaScript variable to be this, whatever this is. This is going to be a text ultimately. So now we want to add that in, and I put that in the wrong place. It needs to be over here, I believe. And let's format this again. This is the problem too. Not having it formatted is really annoying because it's like so hard to see where stuff should be. Honestly. Okay. I think we're good to go. Let's see if this works. Now, if you don't get the exact syntax here, don't worry. I hope you took away, if anything, the more important piece of this, which is what is happening here. So let's just quickly go through again what is happening in each step. We have some HTML, some really basic HTML. We have a button and we have some input and we have a result. When a person clicks on the button, we send whatever is in this text box to the Google Gemini API. We add in the value from our text box. We get the response. When we get the response, we simply add it to the screen. That's it. That's kind of how most web apps work at a really fundamental level. You type something in, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, Airbnb, you type something in, it gets sent to a server takes that request, gives you a response, and it does something with that response. Changes the screen updates to show your response. That's it. Let's try this again. Recipe for hot doge. Submit, and let's see what we get here. This suspense is killing me. Let's see in the console if we got any errors here. Okay, we'll get that out of the way. And you better give me back something. Come on, man. Come on, man. Unexpected end of input. Oh, wait. Was that my issue right there? Okay, that might have been my issue. I put something in the wrong freaking place. So my syntax was off. Just format. Okay. That was a little embarrassing, isn't it? Okay, well, maybe that'll just work now. All right, let's try it out again. Hot doge recipe. Submit, and let's see if we get anything. Look at that. Look at that. It says, all right, let's make some delicious hot dogs, bro. And it gives me this big old long answer that I don't want. The answer is not formatted really well. Like you see, it's in markdown format essentially. So it has all these weird things. Let's take this a step further. So let's wrap this in backticks, and this will be where we end off. And I'll put text. Respond. You can like add stuff now. Respond to the user query. This. and then you can make some space. Let's make like this a bigger thing so we can like have some space. Please do not use markdown format. Only respond in plain text. So now we should still be responding to the user's query, but now we don't respond with Markdown. We only use plain text. This is the really cool thing about using AI. You can just add stuff into the user's query. You can just massage a little bit, just add a few additional directions, and you can get back something really, really cool. Now, this is almost like retrieval augmented generation. Basically, you look at a user's request and you would add some additional information that helps the large language model understand what to do. Now, real retrieval augmented generation is much more complex, or it can be, but this is a way to do it and get something back that you actually want. So let's do a recipe for um, potatoes. Why not? And we'll submit it. And this time, let's cross our fingers that we get back something. And it still did it. What the hell? Let me add one more piece to it with no formatting. All right, we'll do it one last try here. Let's do another recipe. What the hell, Google Gemini? This is ridiculous. Recipe for a cat. I don't know. Let's see what happens here. Oh, hey, look, it did give us back plain text this time, but it can't give us instructions on how to cook a cat. So sad, too bad. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. By the way, if you are a software developer and you do want to learn how to use AI in a much more interesting way than this, I have also in the show notes a guide on how to do that. And I'm also going to be having a 30-day program working directly with me and a group of people to build something very, very interesting using retrieval augmented generation, learning some math and linear algebra to know the math and the fundamentals behind large language models, and build something that you can actually be proud to show off and that could even help you get hired. Anyway, hope that's helpful, and I will see you around.